would say that the more I have really come to understand the implications of shalom, the more passionate about, if you want to put it, evangelism I have been. Evangelism certainly means spreading good news. And in fact, I would argue that the role of the church, this community of faith that are following Jesus, our call is to understand the secret of shalom and to share it with the rest of the world. If shalom is about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the exposed, working to bring justice into relationships, then we have a massive job to do. And this notion that somehow it's all about going to heaven when you die, which many of us were brought up on, is just fundamentally flawed. It's about bringing the life of God and the practical realities and necessities of life and the joy of living into the hearts and lives of people today. You know, whether or not at a given moment they are yet able to even believe in God. But they are actually, I mean, I believe, I know that they are already embracing the love of God, and they will realize that ultimately. And so, to me, evangelism, I'm very happy with that word, but in a completely different understanding of that term, bringing the good news, I mean, it's in a sense as urgent as ever, not to rescue people from hell, but to get them out of the hells that they often find themselves in, that are here in the world today. And we know that millions of people are trapped in living hells of slavery, of poverty, of fear and terror, and all the other manifestations of evil in the world. And people who follow Jesus, people who are part of this community, one of the words which often used to describe it is the church, should be at the forefront of bringing in this good news, sharing the secret. And the very way in which we do that, the very way in which we work to care for others and share what we have with other people, should be an inspiration to people who maybe have a question about whether God exists or not, and can there be any answer to evil in the world. We should be a living hope, which is a phrase the early Christian community used. And so nobody's let off the hook as far as that's concerned. In fact, you know, the challenge becomes even stronger. I'm a Mish kid. My parents were missionaries in North India, and I was born into a sort of, you know, an evangelical Christian family. I was surrounded by missionaries, all who'd given their, you know, lives to serve God in India. But I have to say that while on one hand, from as early as I can remember, I was choosing Jesus, the very earliest steps, and for many years, my steps towards Jesus were motivated by fear. By a belief that, you know, Jesus was going to come again at any time. When that happened, my parents would be taken. I would almost certainly be left. Certainly if I hadn't asked Jesus into my heart. And if things weren't right between me and God, then really I faced hell. And for a young child, well, for anybody, but for a young child, you know, that's very powerful stuff. And so my early spiritual journey, it was in a very real way shaped by fear. There was a lot of love. My parents were very loving. The missionaries around were loving and loving to the people that they were sharing their understanding of the good news with. But nevertheless, there was this strong strand of fear that was there. And the whole idea was that, you know, at the end of the day, it's getting to heaven. That was the kind of the goal. And then, in 1967, when I encountered Shalom for the very first time, and I had never, here I was in my early 20s, I had never ever heard the idea, the concept, or the ideas within it presented in any situation whatever. and I was sitting in the Theological College library that I was studying in, reading these ideas of Shalom and just having my mind blown by them. And realizing in that moment, I think it was years later that I developed the phrase, it's the secret of the universe. In that moment, sort of viscerally and kind of emotionally as well as intellectually, this is the secret. This is what it is all about. So my journey from childhood fear and rather closed evangelical kind of thinking to a Shalom understanding has been totally and absolutely liberating. What we need to realize is that the diversity of different faiths and beliefs across the world is part of God's original plan in the first place anyways. God is a God of diversity. In the early creation story, we're told to fill the earth and to multiply. The diversity of languages, cultures, and inevitably beliefs is at the heart of God's plan. If you go to Acts chapter 17, there's a very clear statement there that God has scattered us in the world. We're encouraged to live wherever we are able to live, and that God has created us to be people who will search out God and find God. That's the very nature of our being. And we're told that God is in the whole of creation. Romans chapter 12 makes that very clear. That creation itself, wild nature, is a book of revelation. And that God is closer than we can imagine and is there to be found and to be discovered. I believe that the difference between the sort of Shalom integration ultimately and religious pluralism is more in the sense of understanding that when people say, well, on one hand people say, well, all religions are the same. All religions are not the same. And I think we dishonour people of different faiths if we make that statement. From the perspective we find ourselves in now, there are different worldviews. Of all the world faiths, the one that I as a Christian find closest link with is in fact Buddhism. In fact, I found a closer sort of kinship with the Buddhist ideas of how to live than I have, say, looking at Judaism or Islam, which historically you would say would be closer. But actually, my Buddhist friends have a completely different worldview. They believe, as do the Hindus, that this world, this experience with what they is samsara, it's an illusion, and that ultimate reality is found through enlightenment, recognizing that this is just an illusion, and finding full enlightenment in a realization of Tatvamasi, as they say, that is thou, that there is this extinction at the end of living and being to be found in, as the Buddhists would say, nirvana. Now that is completely different from a biblical view of the renewed heaven, the renewed earth. So there are differences in how we view the world, but a huge amount of common ground, particularly in the area of values, in compassion, in love, in justice. And of course there will be cultural differences, but of course the truth is that in sharing the vision of Shalom with people in different cultures, people in all different cultures will explore it and experiment with it and express it in quite different ways. And so the kind of neat little caveats that religious pluralism and other ways of thinking about different faiths have, I don't believe do justice to the awesome reality that we're talking about, and often do an injustice to particular faiths in the way that they address them. The key thing is whether what they're believing is life-giving or whether it's destructive. And I believe also that God is at work in wanting to draw us all to a greater understanding. And I know that, my Buddhist friends and my Hindu friends and my Sikh friends have perceptions, spiritual perceptions and understandings that I can learn hugely from, and particularly when I see them exampled in their lives. So it's not so much, well, let everybody go on their own way and it doesn't really matter. It's sort of saying, no, it's trying to work together, draw together, learn from one another. But it's not starting, as I was brought up, the first thing is to prove that everybody who doesn't believe what I believe is wrong. And then I've got to sort of put them right. I mean, that is horrendous. Jesus doesn't do that.